One. Welcome back to Philosophy for the People, ladies and gentlemen. We are here once again with Dr. Jim Madden. We are now on books. Do like what did Macho Man used to do with the pinky? We're at book 7 of Aristotle's Ethics, and it's been a great series so far. I apologize that it has been a bit sporadic and certainly intermittent, but here we are.
Yep.
Forging ahead. So, Dr. Jim, thank you as always for being here.
And as always, I'm distracted by my notice on my phone that in fact we're on the air. So
you are subscribed to the channel.
Because I too like and subscribe to the Philosophy of the People podcast. Right.
As everybody listening to this should and must. Yeah.
Sure as heck better. All right. And so, I know, like our like we got through the Republic with great discipline, right? Because I was teaching the Republic, like basically I was walking out of class having just lectured on the book that we discussed, right?
Right.
Whereas the Incontinence Ethics is not on either of our plates right now, and so when like the true exigencies of community and political life come up, then our book about community and political life has had to go to the back burner.
We're not being incontinent.
Right. Exactly. Which is apropos for today. Yeah. So and I'll say this is like, if you look at where we're at, we're kind of almost done with this thing. Okay.
Yeah. Getting close. Yep.
So we've got today we're doing book 7. Okay. And then next we have the friendship books, which are 8 and 9. I'm going to propose we just kind of tackle those all at once rather than having 2 separate episodes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's good.
And then we've got book 10, which book 10 for me, that's the money book, man. I think that's a very cool thing. Okay. So I think even though we've been a bit choppy on this, we're almost through it. Right.
Yeah, we're getting it done, no matter what. Yeah. So this is great, and we're going to talk about continence, incontinence, and maybe a little bestiality if we can fit it in here today.
I mean, hey, rock and roll, man, rock and roll, right above it. We are going to hear about the denizens of the Black Sea. Right? These are not, yeah. And I think today we might, rather than talk about denizens of the Black Sea, we might talk about Arby's employees, but
I thought we were going to save that for Freaky Friday.
Yeah, no, it's a tease. It's a tease.
Somebody was peeing in the milkshakes again.
Yeah, exactly. So true fans of the show will know what we're talking about here and know that we're going to return them to the Arby's issue on Friday. But it is apropos to what we're doing today. Okay, so we did book 6 last time, right? And book 6 is Aristotle's treatment of virtues of thought, not virtues of character.
Yeah.
In the Incontinence Ethics. Now, it's important to note too, terminologically, that as soon as you get to book 2, Aristotle uses the word virtue just to refer to virtues of character. Okay. So when he says virtue throughout here, he basically means virtue of character. There's a lot of confusion that can be caused by this, right? He has a timeout in book 6 to talk about virtue of thought. Okay. And we saw there that the reason he's talking about virtue of thought is because he does, although he thinks virtue of character is primarily about the management of emotion, but emotion can only be managed under the guidance of thought, of some kind of like claim to truth. Okay. But he says in book 6, as we discussed, is, well, it's not scientific reason that is relevant to virtue, to practical character, right? To being practically wise. Because the issues that we encounter in being practically wise do not admit of absolute universal demonstration, right? The practical life is a moving target. Okay. And so he says there must be this other thing, right? This practical wisdom, which is about knowing what is the right thing to do, right? And knowing how to go about it. All right. Now we're going to see this gets added in today, and I think it was already there back in book 6. To be practically wise, though, is not just to know what to do. It is to actually do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we'll see also that being practically wise is not the same thing as being virtuous. One could be practically wise and not virtuous, right? Although I think anyone who's virtuous is practically wise. Okay.
Right.
Now, also back in book 6, this was relevant. It kind of explains why he's doing book 6. He says, because Socrates has this view that like having reason is constitutive of virtue. Like if you have right reason, if you have practical wisdom, you are virtuous. Okay. And whereas Aristotle has argued, no, it does not follow. There's a difference between virtue and being practically wise. Okay. And he's going to explain that in the coming book, but it's important that he staked his claim there. Okay. Now, another thing to note too, because listeners to our series in Republic will note this, is that on this point that Aristotle's making contra Socrates, I believe Plato and Aristotle, at least based on the Republic, are on the same page on this. Okay. So I think it's important to note that Aristotle does not use Socrates and Plato interchangeably. These are two different thinkers for him, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know if he would have known Socrates, but certainly Socrates, he knew people who knew Socrates, and he had information about the actual historical Socrates and his views that we don't have, right? We only have Okay, that's important.
So you're emphasizing that just because Aristotle might be disagreeing with Socrates, that doesn't mean necessarily he's disagreeing with Plato.
Yeah, because I actually think, once you get that, you can see, we've talked about this when we did earlier in this series on Aristotle. A lot of what goes on in the Nicomachean Ethics is redundant with what goes on in the Republic.
Yes.
Right. I think there's a lot of it. There's more agreement there than people lead on quite often. Okay.
For sure.
So what is the Socratic view, right? And let's just leave Plato out of the debate. Well, the Socratic view is to know what the right thing to do is just to do it. It's unthinkable for Socrates that anyone could know the right thing and not do it. It's just self-destructive. It's just irrational. Okay. And so for Socrates, it seems, and we don't really have this view, like it's just reconstructed here by like the hearsay that we're getting from Aristotle, but it seems what he was saying is like there is no category of sin that isn't really just ignorance.
Right.
Like ethical failing is always a case of ignorance. Like if you didn't do the right thing, you just didn't know the right thing to do. Right?
That's right. And there's people who hold that view today, right? And so that they tend to also be like universalists in a sense, because they think there can't ever be like sort of ultimate culpability for ignorance, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And also this makes it so, one, like when you want to talk about like issues of salvation and damnation theologically, it's going to make a huge difference, but also just what counts for moral education is going to make a difference now, right?
Totally.
Because if you go with that Socratic view, what it is to educate somebody in the virtues is just simply the head game. It's the intellectual side of it. If we just tell them the right thing to do, they're going to do it, right? And this is one of those things.
It's just like dump in just the software and it will determine them. Boom. Once you know it, it's just going to happen.
Exactly. And this is one of those deals where Aristotle is not going to give you a big demonstration against this position, because he just thinks it's just so clearly not the case, right? That he thinks it's obvious that you do all sorts of stuff that you wish you hadn't done. And it wasn't because you didn't know it was wrong at the time to do it.
Dude, it's so funny because I mean, that's St. Paul's line. Why do I do the things that I know are dumb and sinful? I know I don't want to do. So funny. My son literally had that line yesterday. Like my son is proof of Aristotle's concept, right? Like yesterday he did something stupid and his mom reprimanded him. And he just totally went St. Paul. He's like, Mom, I know they're bad things and I don't want to do the bad things, but then sometimes I just do them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, here we are. Yeah. And I don't mean to needlessly.
By the way, he tried to get Marin to have a toilet party. That was the.
Oh, okay.
So, hold on, I'll correct you once I'm done laughing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like things got real at the Flynn household yesterday.
I was out of the house.
Yeah,
I have to get in. Right? And Christine just heard upstairs, like from his chanting, "Come on, Marin, let's have a toilet party." She's like, "What?" I'm gonna put an end to this right away.
Yeah, we're
anyway,
stop that.
Sorry. Continue.
Yeah, no problem. This has never stopped us before. And so, and I don't want to like make a caricature or lampoon of the Socratic position, right? But like what Aristotle's going to, he just thinks it's basically obvious that we do have a problem with ethical incontinence. We knowingly do the wrong things.
Yes.
Okay. And it's also, this plays into his whole notion of moral culpability and all this stuff. Okay. And so he's not going to give you a big demonstration against it. And the way Aristotle does it is he gives you a plausible account to the contrary. And he thinks the burden of proof will carry him through on this.
Right. Yeah. Right? It's obvious that this is the way the world is. So I don't have to prove the other position is like, say, logically inconsistent. I just have to give you a model for why the obvious one is actually plausible. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay.
Correct.
All right, so what Aristotle's I'm going to kind of give like a 30,000 foot view of this thing first.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. And I actually think Yeah, I once again, I don't want to make teaching Aristotle's ethics about. I don't want to make it preaching. I don't want to make it about like the individual moral formation. Okay, but okay, I think book 7 is one of the most important moments in this for that purpose, though. Right.
Yes.
I think there's much to learn about like how to improve your life and how to think about your failings and stuff in book 7. Right. And I think it's an underappreciated gem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Skip the New York Times self-help stuff, guys. You just go back to it.
Yeah, go back to book 7. Yeah. So what Aristotle does is he distinguishes between 4 basic states of character. Okay. Like and he not it's you got to kind of piece it together throughout book 7. Okay. So he basically says is what we have virtue. Okay. And what is a virtue? To be virtuous of character is to know the right thing to do, both in what end should I pursue and practically how should I go about it. Okay. It's to know the right thing to do. It is to have no regret about doing it. Okay. And we've talked about regret in the past, right? It's that after the fact, you're not in any way thinking it would have been kind of cool if I could have done otherwise. You're happy to have done it, right? You do not regret doing it, and you actually do it. And actually for Aristotle, to know the right thing and not have regret about doing it means you did it. Right. I mean, he's at that level, he's going to give Socrates his due. If you know what to do and you're a decent bloke, right? Meaning you don't regret about it, then you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, so we're going to get back to the Socratic puzzle here in a minute. Second state is what he calls self-control in the Reeves translation. I think more traditionally, it's just continence. Okay. It's in control. And what control means is you know the right thing to do, but you regret that is the right thing to do, but you still do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah, there's a tension still, right? Yeah.
Virtue is I know it, I like it, I do it.
And it's easy.
It's easy, man. Yeah. Like no one likes the virtuous guy. It's like, oh, I just rather have the broccoli, right? Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And whereas for the person in control, the self-controlled person or the continent person, that's that they know it, they don't like it, but they do it.
And they fight for it because they can still see that it's good, right? Yeah.
And Aristotle says they have a kind of guilt about doing the right thing. You'd be like, if I could have just had the cake, it would have been cool, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, and so that's the self-controlled person. Now we're going to go back later and we're going to distinguish self-control from temperance because they're different, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The lack of self-control person or the incontinent person knows the right thing to do, okay, and regrets that that's the right thing to do and thereby doesn't do it. They knowingly do the wrong thing. And this is the category that Socrates is saying is impossible, right? Okay. The vicious person does not know they're warped. What they think is the right thing to do is the wrong thing to do. So they're epistemically off kilter now.
Yep.
Okay. And thereby they don't regret doing this. So they do the wrong thing. Happily.
Right.
But they do it unknowingly. Okay. So for Socrates, it's as if you only have vice and virtue. Right. There's practical reason operating, and that's virtue. And then you have practical reason off kilter, and that's vice. Right. Aristotle's saying there's these other 2 states in the middle there. Okay. Do you see that? And so if you look at what's going on there, it's that notion of regret that comes in. Like Aristotle thinks it's perfectly coherent to say someone knew the right thing, did it, but didn't like doing it. Right. Okay. And also I think it's perfectly coherent to say they knew the right thing, they didn't like the right thing, and thereby didn't do it. Okay. All right. Now, so you can kind of see these. Now, another very big important thing here is this kind of warps our intuitions, right? Because like Aristotle thinks the best of these states is virtue. Okay. Where you just it's almost unreflective. He would still say there's practical reason going on here. Okay. There's practical wisdom going on here, but it's not deliberative in an explicit way necessarily. Like, oh, I know the right thing to do. I like the right thing, so I just do it. Like the virtuous person is kind of going around whooshing into the right thing all the time, right?
Yeah, it's a sort of tacit knowledge, a masterful knowledge.
It's a mastery, right? Whereas we think now, like the best way to be is to overcome the big temptation, right? To show your grit, right?
Right.
For Aristotle, the best life doesn't have a lot of grit in it. right?
Yeah.
You just know the right thing to do, and you do
So
it. And, yeah.
I want to say, I actually don't think that warps our intuitions once we think about that in terms of any other discipline or skill, right? Like, who's the better jujitsu
Yep.
player? The one who really struggles to success, or the one who
Yeah.
just glides to success?
The guy
right?
just sits back and scratches. Oh, I know that's the right move. I just don't want to do it. No,
Right.
it's not a good. It's not a good jiu-jitsu player, right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Exactly, right. And this is really good. It's like Aristotle thinks of the moral life, the ethical life, in the same way that we think about the arts or sport or any. It's a
Right.
human practice, right? It's a human
Mhm.
practice that one can be more or less skilled at, right?
Mhm.
But we see our great heroes are the ones to overcome the greatest like resistance, right?
Mhm.
It's this kind of like Protestant work ethic thing that we have, right?
Mhm.
Whereas Aristotle sees the great hero is just the guy who's so awesome there's no struggle,
Right. Mhm.
right? And who's achieved that just facility of the skill of living well, that it's gotten easy and pleasurable to them. Because for him, to have no regret is to have pleasure in it, right? Pleasure is
Right.
a state you don't regret, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And do you see
Excellent.
that? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And so, um, so, and Aristotle like, makes this point. He says, so virtue is very, very stable. Okay. Like, because you're not really tempted to go the wrong way here, right?
Mhm.
You know what to do, you like it. So you're probably going to persist in the doing the right thing, the good thing. Okay. Um, self-control is unstable because you have regret, right? You did the right thing, but if I had it back again, I don't know if I would do it the same way, right? So you can't make any guarantees, so it's inherently unstable. So there's a possibility of slipping into lack of self-control if you're at the level of self-control. Do you see
Right.
that?
Mhm.
So that's why like self-control is not as good. It's less pleasant personally to do it. And moreover, you're on a slippery slope now down, right?
Yeah. Right.
And the same things like self-control, the lack of self-control, right, is better than vice. Even though the vicious person may enjoy their lives rather much, right? Okay. At least they don't have a lot of regrets until they get hit by a bus or something, right? Okay. But the person who's at the level of lack of self-control has regret. They feel badly about what they've done. And where you feel badly, there's a possibility of slipping upwards. Do you see that?
Right.
I wish I hadn't eaten the cake. I wish I had the broccoli. Like that pain of guilt there is kind of like a hope. It's hopeful because you might next time do the right thing.
Right.
Do you see that? And so what I find interesting about this is that for Aristotle, all these states are unstable to some degree, whereas like vice is very stable, the
And
most
virtue.
stable, and
Right.
virtue is stable, right? And his thing too is like once you reach the level of vice,
Yep.
he doesn't think there's much that can be done for you because you don't regret what you do, and you're
Dude,
probably going to be stuck there. Yeah.
And this, I mean, this ties in really significantly, and not to make the episode theological, but I mean,
Well, it lends it to this. Yeah.
I mean, it lends it really well because that is, at least Aquinas, who's obviously building off Aristotle, his conception of hell has less to do with God just putting people somewhere and more to do with psychology.
It's what
right?
you've become.
It's psychology, right? You're literally stuck in this post-mortem fixity state where you're just twisted in on yourself,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's pretty much how Aristotle describes the vicious person, right? So
And
just
and
something for people to
what I
think about
find
here.
just like just deeply frightening. Okay.
Yeah.
If you're at the level of lack of self-control, you're incontinent. Your repeated acts of incontinence someday are going to slip into vice, and you won't know the difference. Isn't that scary?
Yeah,
Right?
dude,
Like,
beware, people,
yeah.
right?
Like, does Gollum know that he's Gollum? He doesn't.
No.
Right? Because he's like slipped into
But
that.
there was a point
There was
when
a
he
point.
did know where he was going.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
So he does not
yeah.
escape culpability. That's the key.
I
right?
read that whole strand of the Lord of the Rings with Gollum as like kind of this. It's like Aristotle's, or probably
And Tolkien knew this stuff.
Tolkien,
of course,
Tolkien,
he was beautiful at making it just so apparent, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And all this stuff is intuitive. Like, we've all experienced this. We've all experienced people who've slid from incontinence to viciousness, where you just think of addicts, right?
Yeah.
Like the great example of this type of character state where they cannot admit they're doing anything wrong, but they knew on their way that they were doing something very wrong. They seem completely unable to turn themselves around. And I'm not even talking like hardcore drug addiction. I'm just talking a certain character state that people get into, right? This type of absolute viciousness. So yeah, nothing but real agreement here with Aristotle. I think he's got it right.
This is a hard one to criticize. Okay. And so as much as I don't want to fanboy, right? And also, like this is one of those books where, like, when you start talking about like how you raise your kids, okay, you are not you don't raise your kids with in mind that they're gonna like setting them up to like have these like big resistance to temptation moments,
Mhm.
right? You mostly raise them. I mean, like those are the moments you remember because that was like the day you spent yelling at Rome about the toilet party, right? Okay, but
Right.
you know what I mean,
Like, right.
right? But for the most part, someday he's gonna watch this episode and hate you, right? But for the most part, what you do is you like just spend constant reinforcement of small things, small things, small things, small things, small things,
Yep.
so that they get these habits, so that because like 99.99% of the time we all are doing the right thing and mostly liking it, right? Well, where does that
Right.
come from? Like physiological hardwiring and like long habit,
Yeah.
right? Okay, do you see that?
And that's a traditional notion of true freedom in the sense of freedom for excellence and flourishing is,
yes,
yes, at first make the good sort of accessible, so we struggle for it a bit, that's
yeah,
continence, but then not just accessible, but effortless. That's where you wanna get to.
effortless, yeah,
Effortless,
yeah.
yeah.
You know, in what Aristotle has in mind here as like the virtuous state is that kind of just that effortless getting around of the practically experienced person who is not plagued by temptation anymore, who doesn't regret it. Yeah,
Right.
right,
Yeah, yeah.
right.
Mhm.
And I just find that notion of like this is where we talked about habit back in book 2. This is where we really get a sense of why that's so important, right? Because the more you hang around in those two middle states,
Yeah.
right, or where you hang over that middle line, it's good.
Mhm.
You're drifting one way or another. And which way do you want to drift? Well, you don't want to drift down because at some point you're going to become self-destructive in Aristotle's
Yep.
view, and you won't even know that you have.
And then
Right?
you're screwed, buddy. Out of
You're
luck,
screwed.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, out of luck. Right?
Apart
Yeah.
from divine grace and intervention, which Aristotle didn't maybe consider that too much. Plato had
Yeah.
some interesting
Yeah.
remarks on that, actually, though.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Which
And
was
there's a certain point, I can't forget where it is, where Aristotle says like the gods do seem to help us out a bit, but what he means by that, I don't know.
So,
Yeah.
this is I just want to build on it a little bit,
Yeah.
going a little bit beyond Aristotle, because I think his account is fundamentally correct, and it sees, I think, really good refinement and development with like not just Thomas himself, but other contemporary Thomists like Maritain and Lonergan, where you can start to make further sense of this when you consider what the nature of the will really is and our ability to engage in what's sometimes called voluntary ignorance,
Yeah.
right? Voluntary ignorance, where we have the ability, like the will just is the power to end deliberation, right?
Yeah.
To make it, to make some alternative the final. That's what the will is, right? It's
Yep.
boom. This is where deliberation ends, and we can always sort of not look at certain considerations when making particular judgments, things which we habitually know, right?
Right.
And it's because they're things that we habitually know that we cannot look at. So, like, Socrates has got something right. Like, if we're looking at it, looking analogically, right?
Yeah.
Hard to do the wrong thing, but we have the power not to look and consider things under different guises, always guises of goods. And it's that ability that we have related to our freedom of the will in the space of reasons to engage in voluntary ignorance, which it affirms something what Socrates is saying. There is an ignorance involved in any sort of sin, right? But it's an ignorance that we are culpable for because it's a voluntary ignorance where we have chosen not to consider what we do habitually know, right?
Yeah.
And
that goes
that's a
back to book
critical
3 here
subtlety.
too,
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's in book 3 of it. Where he talks
It is
about
in Aristotle,
you
right? Yeah.
can be responsible for your
Mhm.
ignorance because of your repeated acts of lack of self-control, of incontinence.
Right.
Right? You've slipped yourself into ignorance. Yeah.
Indeed.
And think of now how is he replying to the Socratic position, which says, well, how could you possibly do the wrong thing knowingly, right? And what Aristotle does is he says, well, you can, like, he basically says, like, you ever have that where somebody asked you a question about mathematics, right? And you can't quite come up with the answer. And then when you see the answer, like, oh my God, I knew that. I had that. I just didn't, something blocked me at the time, right?
Mhm.
And so what Aristotle thinks moral incontinence is, or lack of self-control is where like you do have the practical reason is operating to suggest to you the right premises, but you are distracted by something else.
Mhm.
Okay. So literally, like, you are distracted by your emotional state. Okay. So you have the knowledge implicitly, but there's something blocking you at the time. Okay. Now
Mhm.
you say, well, can that be your fault? And he'll say, in the moment, it's not your fault. Okay. But over the long term, it can be your fault because of your repeated acts of incontinence, or why you're constantly not able to like see past these emotions.
Mhm.
Do you see
Mhm.
that? Right. So he does kind of agree with Socrates. Yeah. Like it's, you can't be thinking this is the right thing to do, he thinks, and then not do it. Okay. But it doesn't mean you're thinking it's the right thing to do all along that you know it. Do you see that? You can be distracted by your emotions. But even though I can't determine right now whether I'm distracted by my emotions, I can over the long term, like through habit, determine that.
Yes.
And that's why for Aristotle, culpability is not like what's going on now. It's the long game. It's the long game.
Yeah. And same thing for Thomas, right? They're going to say you do have to habitually know something before you can be culpable for choosing to ignore it, right?
Yeah.
So like, there is instances of ignorance where you're not going to be culpable, even if you're still responsible, right? But certainly over the long term, we do gain this habitual knowledge where we fail to consider things which we are capable of considering. And that's where the culpability.
And let's say I'm just like this lout who goes off the handle with anger all the time. And sure, in that moment, I probably can't stop it now. But why has it become this like snowball rolling habit of mine? Because I have refused to push back against it.
Yeah.
Or not. Do you see that? Right.
Right.
And this is where then he gets this very interesting distinction in this book between lack of self-control and intemperance. Okay. And what intemperance is for him is a vice. It's a state of vice wherein you are no longer able to control because for him, like the main worry is your control about pleasure and pain. Okay. He's like, we don't really have a problem with people lacking self-control about like their desire for victory and honor and stuff like that. He's like, it comes up, but let's face it, that's not the real human problem, right? The real human problem is like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? Okay. And so he says like, so the main worry is like how we like dispose ourselves towards pleasure and pain. And he says, so let's distinguish between lack of self-control about pleasure and pain and intemperance about pleasure and pain. And what intemperance is where it's the vice of this, right? It's where you are not even suggesting to yourself what the right thing is. You're just, oh, that's going to feel good. That's going to feel good. Whereas lack of self-control is like, yeah, I know in the background, if I thought about it, I could see that this was wrong. I'm just not doing that right now. Do you see the difference there?
I do. Yeah. Good.
And I think that's very important for understanding ourselves. Right. Okay. And like, as long as you know what the right thing to do was, you're not intemperate yet.
Just on your way, buddy.
On your way. Yeah.
Yeah. Good stuff. I see some stuff in the comments, so we'll take some questions here in a minute. Unless, Jim, anything else you wanted to add?
No, because I mean, we covered the big stuff. He's going to, in the end here of book 7, get into the relationship between pleasure and the good life. Okay. And a lot of that's going to get repeated in book 10, right? So let's just punt that to book 10. We'll get that there. Because what he says about pleasure and the good life is not what you expected. So it's pretty cool. So stay tuned for that.
Good stuff. Brandon has noticed the new glasses. Yes, these are new glasses. No more taped glasses. Got these at Costco. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, they look good, man. Look good.
Thanks, bro. Brother. Yeah. The old Costco.
I'll put my glasses on too.
Yeah, put them on. All right, let's take some questions here. Take a few here. Mount Athos and Aquinas Fellowship wants to know, is moral dissonance a right way of describing this? What do you think about that description, Jim? Moral dissonance.
I'm not quite sure what we mean.
Well, dissonance is often a musical term, right? It's a lack of harmony is how we typically think about that. Tension resulting from different combinations of notes. Yeah, you talked about rock and roll. Think about the devil's triad, right?
Exactly. That would be I guess you could say that about the middle two states, right? Like there's no dissonance for the virtuous person or the vicious person. They're comfortable, right? Whereas the middle two states, the control and lack of control, those would be where you're feeling a tension, you feel regret. Yeah, so I could go with that.
I'm trying to draw out some musical analogies here. So the virtuous person is there's a lot of harmony and it's beautiful. The vicious person is there's no dissonance, but it's really ugly.
Yeah.
Right.
It's only from the outside, though.
Yeah, only from the outside, right? But on the inside, they twisted, right? Yeah. That's good. Yeah, man, I've just crushed with the music has actually been taking up more of my time lately than even my current book writing projects. So I've got a lot of music and philosophy on the mind right now. So test me. Go ahead. I love Ortiz says, or Ortzi, says, this is easily in my top 3 most enjoyable episodes of philosophical discussion. Thanks a lot. Well, thank you, good sir.
Thank you,
really appreciate that. Happy to hear you guys are getting benefit from the series.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Really do appreciate it. Deadly Havoc. I'm sorry, Jim, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I appreciate that. And I do think it's important that we get a series on the Nicomachean Ethics out there, right? I think just for what our mission of this website is, right? So
Yeah, and help us out, guys. Please, share, comment, help us get some more traction around this stuff, especially if you're getting value out of it. All right, Deadly Havoc wants to know what do you see as the role of addiction in relation to culpability? Yeah, definitely a thorny topic here, Jim. Maybe you want to offer a few thoughts.
yeah, I mean, this is one where it's going to be really case by case. Okay, so I mean, like you don't get hooked on heroin without taking your first hit of heroin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I doubt that there are very many people out there who are utterly uninformed about the risks of that. Though I think people do get into it, this sort of thing, before they're at an age that we would really see them as culpable for doing stuff. Okay, and there's also some very, very interesting evidence. I know some of it's controversial, like all evidence, right? That whether or not a substance is addictive has as much to do with the overall context of that person's emotional, psychological health as it does with the actual chemical makeup of the substance. Okay, so there were famous experiments, I think, done back in the 70s, showing that they gave, they exposed rats to heroin and just in like a plain ordinary cage, and they like almost I don't know if it's heroin, it's some sort of opiate, and they almost universally like OD'd themselves on it. Okay, and then they put the rats, another batch of rats, in a cage where they had access to like treadmills to run on, and they had to like go through a maze to hunt for their food. They occasionally got a date with the lady rats and stuff like that.
Right.
And they could take or leave the opiate water. Okay, so the idea is whether or not something's addictive probably has a lot to do with whether or not you have other sources of like dopamine in your life, right? Like, and just in my own anecdotally, why was I able to like in my 40s say, you know what, I'm never gonna have another drink of alcohol again in the rest of my life, and have had no problem since then. I have a wonderful wife, wonderful children, a satisfying career, jiu-jitsu, all that stuff.
Other interests, other projects.
I can pump that dopamine in high quality in all these other ways in my life, right? So now let's say though I'm in my mid 40s and I realize I cannot have another drop of alcohol, but yet I have a terrible marriage and maybe a physical disability so that I can't do much with myself, all that, right? It's going to be a lot harder for me to not ever have another drop of alcohol then, right? It seems like I don't have a source of that like chemical reward for myself, right? So does that Jim or the real Jim, I mean, there's a difference in culpability, I think, there. I'm not saying the other guy has no responsibility.
Right.
But culpability is going to come in degrees here. And I think this is probably true of addiction in general.
And it's all contextual, right?
It's all contextual.
Yeah, there's going to be instances where like, oh yeah, there's clear culpability here. And there's going to be instances where that poor soul, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I mean, I would bet you, I don't know if there's studies on this, but I would bet you this is my untrained hypothesis. I would bet you if you looked at like porn addiction and stuff like that, you're going to find, right, it's not where you have like people like having like great marriages and things like that get into porn and ruin it. It's that this is an expression of a need for a kind of satisfaction, not necessarily sexual satisfaction, that's coming up there. You see what I mean? And so I think a lot of what goes on with what we see as addictive compulsive behavior has to do with this context, and that is going to change the degrees of culpability for it. But I think never no culpability, but probably it's never going to be where you can really judge it, right?
Yeah. No, I see Havoc's clarifying here about like media consumption and social media. Okay. I'll just say like, look, I mean, think from your own experience, man. Like, yeah, even if there were times when because there's been times when I've gotten way too sucked into social media, and I was being honest, like I was definitely culpable for the kind of like sins that led to. Why? Because there were times when I knew what I was doing and I knew where it would lead. And I did it.
You did it, yeah.
And now thankfully I reversed course, right? Yeah. What's that?
But why were you able to reverse course, right? Because that was happening in a life of overall satisfaction. So you were able to say, yeah, I don't need that to be satisfied because I have access to other things.
And I still had enough light to see how it was twisting me, and it was twisting me, right? And then what do? You have to delete it off your phone. You have to set structures, right? You have to take real steps. You have to change your environment a lot of times. Get your wife to help if you need, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I bit it pretty early on compared to most other people, but like it did, like I started like, there were bad things coming out of that, right? Like, like ignoring other more important responsibilities, stuff like that. So no, I would say like if I even got way further down to that where I became like really corrupted by that, in my instance, I would say, yeah, I would definitely be culpable for that, right? Because of how I got there and what came before, right? There is a point for a lot of people where there is that morally significant decision or set of decisions, even if you get to a later point where you're so sort of fundamentally corrupted and twisted in on yourself that you no longer even have the ability to reverse course. There was some point before that, right? And I think that's one of Aristotle's critical insights, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Jim, you want to take a closing question here?
Yeah, let's see what we got here. I'm going to go back.
Let you pick the closer. And then, guys, if you have more questions, we're doing Freaky Friday tomorrow. So just bring them there, and we'll just do our usual thing on Friday and just jam on any and whatever questions you want to throw our way. Mm-hmm.
How would you encourage those who are skeptical of Aristotle and his ethics to take him seriously? Refer them to this podcast. Have your friend read the book and or listen to the podcast. I'm not saying because we're so great. It's just that I think it's. I'm not saying you can't disagree with Aristotle and still be rational, right? I mean, I'm not saying that, right? I'm not saying like only a madman would disagree with this, but I think it's hard to like take the text at face value and see what he's saying and not take the argument seriously, right? So I think some kind of exposure, right, to the actual book or something like what we're doing here. This is kind of why we're doing this, right? Would be a good first step.
Yeah. So I'll say a couple things about this. First off, I mean, like anything else, I mean, it's Aristotle, consistently considered one of the, if not the greatest philosophers of all time. So if you're into philosophy and if you don't pay some level of respect to Aristotle, like what the heck are you doing, right? Even if you don't agree with him, like you better take him seriously, even if you don't take his philosophy as your philosophy, right? There's just no excuse not to. And I would say that about many other thinkers who I don't agree with. So that's just a general philosophical attitude. The other thing I will say is that there's a lot in Aristotle that has, I would say, been sort of affirmed by contemporary science. In fact, Jim, this is, I don't know if you're still subscribed to American Catholic Philosophical Quarterly, but there's a good issue on philosophical anthropology.
Yeah, it just came out, right?
Yeah, there's an essay in there by Tim Paul. Really good. And it's on Christian moral wisdom, which of course is drawing from Aristotle's virtue ethics. And it's looking at the contemporary psychological research on these different moral disciplines, which are deeply related to virtue ethics and natural law, and showing like, oh, wow, this stuff is pretty good, spot on, right? Of how you, focus on one thing rather than many, and how you think about developing virtue and why virtue is, of course, a thing to develop. And even fasting, they looked at the psychological, not just the physiological, but the psychological benefits of fasting, which is often overlooked. This essay looked at. So it's a really, if anyone subscribed to that journal, it's a really good essay, and that might be.
If you were to check out, I forget the name of some of his books, but a guy named Seligman is probably one of the leading names in psychology today, and he's written quite a bit about the virtue tradition in ethics and how he thinks it's basically been affirmed pretty soundly by a lot of the empirical stuff that's come out in the 21st century, right? And I love it when you hear a psychologist talk about, well, we now know that executive function is important for like regulating your emotions and thereby having a good life. I'm like, yeah, we've all seen that movie before, man.
Right. One of my favorite insults about psychology to make anyone mad is that, like, tell me anything a psychologist said that either wasn't already said by Aristotle, a used car salesman, or a shaman, and then I'll finally be impressed.
No, I am married to a psychologist.
I know. I don't mean it.
No, but
said it was a joke. No offense.
Exactly. No, she wouldn't disagree with a lot of it, and my wife would make distinctions between the practice as a therapist and the scientific discipline of psychology.
Right.
And the practice of therapy is something much closer to what you find in Nicomachean Ethics, right? Than the kind of platitudes that like dominate contemporary psychology.
Right.
I
do. One last thing: if this skeptical person just, I guess, isn't into philosophy in general, and they're just skeptical for whatever reason, I'll
find another friend, man.
Yeah, find a new set of friends. But Adler's stuff is really good on just his Aristotle for Everybody. I think is just really good of just trying to get people to take a look at Aristotle. Obviously, I'm a big fan of, you got to just read the primary material, but if you're going to recommend something secondary, I think Adler's is always a good one. All right, sweet man. Jim, what are you working on? What do you want to announce before we go? Support a professor, get his nihilism course, that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
feel free, nihilism course, as whatever you think it's worth, right? Come confront Nietzsche with me. Probably next weekish, I'm gonna have a new course up on Heidegger's questions concerning technology. I did update my website, jdmadden.com, put some papers up that I hadn't had up yet, put some links to some recent podcasts and lectures I've given and stuff like that. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, jdmadden.com, the philosophy section's got a couple of new goodies. I put up my review of the Agnostic Inquirer, which I hadn't had up there before. And
Oh,
that's
sweet.
something, we've discussed. It's a draft of it. I don't have a PDF of the final, so find that in the ACBQ. So
Good enough is good enough.
Good enough is good enough for the internet, right?
Mhm.
So other than that, that's all I have going right now.
Sweet deal, man. And tomorrow we'll be back with our Freaky Friday Q&A.
We'll see.
Maybe, perhaps.
We'll see.
Possibly.
I've got a I'm going to the World War I museum tomorrow.
Oh, sweet.
Because it's half price for Memorial Day weekend and free for active duty military in my son's home. So we're gonna take. So we'll see. I should be home in time for that, but we'll see.
Well, hey, no worries if not. Priorities are priorities. So,
Definitely.
gentle listeners, tentatively, hit that little what's that little bell thing on YouTube that gives you?
Yeah,
It's the thing you get on your phone whenever you go
exactly.
live. Make that happen on your phone.
Exactly. Yeah, I think if you subscribe, you should get it.
There you go. So,
and if we do Freaky Friday tomorrow, we're gonna talk Arby's. So
yeah, we got big news.
Big news.
In the meantime, don't get the milkshakes, don't get the curly fries.
Yeah.
I mean, you shouldn't be doing that anyways. After
Peel the bun back and inspect before you go. Due diligence, friends.
Hit the like button, subscribe. We'll catch you guys next time. Peace.